The cardboard box on my passenger seat felt like a pathetic trophy for 25 years of my life. Yesterday they called me Old Man Frank, the ghost in Sterling Financial's machine. Then Chad, a VP young enough to be my son, made me a real ghost. He called my termination a necessary cost-saving measure. Today, my phone was a fire alarm of panicked texts from the IT pit. Then the call came. Chad Williams, the architect of my professional funeral. I watched the name flash, picturing the chaos erupting in that glass tower. I hit ignore and took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The system I built was their prison now, and they didn't even know it yet. The phone buzzed again. Chad. Predictable. They thought my systems were relics. Clunky, over-engineered analog safeguards in a digital world. They called my triple-redundant, air-gapped offline backups Frank's Folly. I was the only admin with root access to the final layer, the physical vaults deep in the sub-basement. And the passwords? I never wrote them down. They were a catechism of my life. My first dog's name, the hospital wing where my daughter was born, the date my wife beat cancer. Unhackable, because they weren't on any network or server, they were in me. The new IT hotshots Chad hired, the ones who sneered at my procedures, were probably running password crackers that would take 1,000 years to guess them. My phone pinged, a voicemail. Chad's voice, tight with a panic he couldn't hide, crackled through the speaker. "Frank, for God's sake, pick up. We're hemorrhaging money. The board is, just call me. Name your price. Anything." A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Oh, I would. And it was going to be expensive. My price. Chad had no idea what the real price was. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle. Forged in a trial by fire a decade ago. We called it the Omega Breach. It wasn't a noisy smash and grab like this ransomware. It was a ghost. A state-sponsored group had lived inside our network for 6 months, silently siphoning terabytes of sensitive client data and trade strategies. The high-priced consultants we flew in charged us 7 figures to tell us we were compromised, something we already knew. It was me, in my windowless office, who found the leak. Not with some fancy new software, but by manually cross-referencing server access logs against security card swipes. An impossible, mind-numbing task. I found the discrepancy at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. A ghost login from a terminal whose user was on vacation in Bermuda. The board was pale. They asked me how to guarantee it would never happen again. "You build a vault," I told them. "Not a digital one, a real one. You take the crown jewels completely offline." That's when Frank's Folly was born. My masterpiece. 3 separate, EMP-shielded, climate-controlled vaults in the sub-basement, each holding a complete copy of the firm's data on archival tapes. The system was air-gapped. No network connection. Ever. The only way in was with physical keys and passwords that existed in only one place. My head. It was slow. It was deliberate. And for 10 years, it was impenetrable. Then came Chad, with his $800 sneakers and a PowerPoint deck full of buzzwords. He called my system a quaint analog bottleneck in a digital-first paradigm. I can still hear his voice in our last budget meeting, dripping with condescension as he addressed the partners. "Frank's system is a fortress from the last century," he'd announced, a smug grin on his face. "We need to be agile. We're moving everything to a cutting-edge, cloud-based solution. Real-time, automated, and a fraction of the cost." "The cloud is just someone else's computer, Chad," I'd said, my voice tight. "A single point of failure, one compromised admin account, and it's all gone." He'd waved a dismissive hand. "The old man is afraid of a little rain. Don't worry, Frank. The new software is foolproof." The irony was a physical weight in my chest. Foolproof. They had fired the one man who understood the infinite creativity of fools. They saw my meticulousness as a flaw, my experience as a liability. They chipped away at my safeguards, calling it progress, but they left the core, the offline vaults, because migrating the petabytes of data was a headache they planned to get to next quarter. Well, next quarter was here. Chad's foolproof system had been cracked open, and now he was on his knees, begging the architect of the old fortress for the keys. He thought they were just passwords. He didn't understand. They were the name of the street I grew up on, the serial number of my father's watch. They were the pieces of a life they had deemed obsolete, a life that was now the only thing standing between Sterling Financial and absolute ruin. I let the phone ring a fourth time before finally answering. I didn't say a word. The silence on my end was a weapon, and I could hear Chad breathing on the other, a ragged, desperate sound. "Frank? Thank God. Frank, listen." The lobby. 30 minutes, I said, and hung up. The drive back into Manhattan was the most satisfying commute of my life. The very traffic that used to be my daily torment now felt like a leisurely procession. I was a king, returning to a kingdom in flames, the only man with a bucket of water. I walked through the revolving doors of the Sterling Financial Tower. The usual morning buzz was gone, replaced by a morgue-like hush punctuated by hushed, panicked whispers. The security guard at the front desk, a guy named Marcus I'd shared coffee with for 15 years, just stared, his mouth slightly agape. I gave him a curt nod. Chad practically sprinted across the marble floor to meet me, his $1,000 suit rumpled, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Frank, the board is waiting. We're on a conference line with London and Hong Kong. We're losing hundreds of millions an hour." Quote, I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "We're not going to the boardroom, Chad. We're going to my old office." His face tightened. My office was a windowless box in the IT wing, the one they'd probably already assigned to some new hire. The walk there was a gauntlet of terrified eyes. The young guns from the IT pit, the ones who used to smirk at my procedures, now looked at me like I was a priest arriving for an exorcism. I ignored them all. My box was still on the desk. I turned to face Chad in the cramped space. "You wanted my price," I said, my voice low and even. "Here it is. It's not a negotiation. These are my terms for services rendered." I ticked them off on my fingers. 1. My consultant fee is $5 million. It will be wired to an account I provide. You will get confirmation of the transfer before I do anything else. Chad nodded frantically. "Done. Anything." "I'm not finished." 2. You will personally draft a memo to the entire global staff and the board of directors. In it, you will state that your decision to sideline my protocols was a catastrophic error in judgment, and that the old man's folly is the only reason Sterling Financial will exist tomorrow. I will approve the final text before it's sent. His face went from pale to chalk white. The public humiliation was a blow I knew he wouldn't see coming. He swallowed hard but nodded again. 3, I continued, leaning in closer, and this is the most important part. I am not giving you the passwords. The flicker of hope in his eyes died. "What? Frank, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the restoration process, NIMIVE process. I will personally oversee the recovery. From the sub-basement up. You and your team of geniuses, you're my new assistants. You will carry the tape drives. You will log the serial numbers by hand in a ledger. You will watch and you will learn, step by painful step, what a real security protocol looks like." I let the silence hang in the air, thick and suffocating. He understood now. This wasn't about a transaction. It was about a lesson, a punishment. "Those," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, "are the terms for the first password, the one that unlocks the first vault. We can discuss my fee for the other two after you've proven you've learned something." Chad's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He looked like I'd just spoken in a dead language, his tailored, digital-first world collapsing into the four walls of this cramped, windowless room. "A lesson?" he finally stammered, his voice a reedy whisper. "Frank, the board will never agree to that memo. That's professional suicide." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I settled into my old chair, the worn leather groaning a familiar welcome. It felt like coming home. "They will," I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone, "because the alternative is professional extinction. For everyone. Including them." I glanced at the digital clock on the wall, its red numbers mocking the chaos outside. "Every 60 seconds you stand here arguing, this firm loses another $2 million. So you can explain to the board why you chose your pride over the company's survival, or you can get to work." I watched the war happen behind his eyes. The fury, the humiliation, the sheer panic, all battling with the cold, hard math of the disaster unfolding around him. The numbers won. He spun on his heel and stalked out of the office, pulling his phone out, his thumb jabbing frantically at the screen. I could hear his muffled, desperate voice echoing down the hallway as he pleaded his case to the powers that be. While he was gone, I reached into the cardboard box on my desk, my pathetic trophy, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger and a fountain pen, my old tools. I opened the ledger to a clean page and wrote today's date at the top in neat, block letters. Then, a heading, System Restoration, Vault 1. The silence in the office was my sanctuary. This was my world, my process. The hum of the servers down the hall was a familiar symphony. I was no longer a ghost. I was the conductor. Chad stumbled back in, his face ashen. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. His tie was askew, his hair a mess. He was broken. "The wire transfer is authorized," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "It will be confirmed within the hour. They want to see a draft of the memo. Now." I didn't look up from my ledger. I simply slid a yellow legal pad and my pen across the polished surface of the desk toward him. The same desk where he had signed my termination papers just yesterday. "Then you'd better start writing," I said. Watching Chad write was a unique form of torture I hadn't anticipated, and I savored every second of it. His hand, usually so steady signing off on million-dollar deals or firing loyal employees, trembled slightly as the expensive pen scratched against the cheap legal pad. He tried to soften the language to wrap his failure in the comforting swaddle of corporate jargon. "Due to unforeseen cybersecurity challenges," he began, his voice raspy. I held up a hand without looking at him. "No, stop." I leaned back in my chair. "You're not writing a press release, Chad. You're writing a confession." I let that word hang in the dead air between us. "Let's try again. I'll help you." He looked up, his eyes pleading. I ignored it. "Start with this," I said, my voice cold and precise. "To the Board of Directors and Global Staff of Sterling Financial, I, Chad Williams, take full and sole responsibility for the catastrophic system failure and subsequent ransomware attack on our firm." He froze, pen hovering over the paper. "Frank, that's career suicide." "You committed career suicide when you called my system a quaint bottleneck," I shot back. "Keep writing." I dictated the next part, watching his knuckles turn white as he gripped the pen. "My decision to override established, proven security protocols in favor of a new, inadequately vetted cloud solution was a grave error in judgment, driven by arrogance and a fundamental misunderstanding of the risks involved." He flinched as if I'd struck him. I wasn't finished. "Add this. The recovery of our firm's assets is now entirely dependent on the very system I sought to dismantle, and on the expertise of the man I wrongly terminated, Frank Kowalski. His system, which I publicly derided as Frank's Folly, is the only thing standing between Sterling Financial and total liquidation." I made him read the whole thing back to me, twice. His voice cracked on the words arrogance and wrongly terminated. The sound was music. Finally, I gave a curt nod. "Send it." He typed it into an email on his phone, his thumbs fumbling. A moment later, a notification chimed on my own phone. A text from my bank. It was a wire transfer confirmation for $5 million. I opened the app, checked the available balance, and saw the number. It was real. Phase 1 was complete. I stood up, pocketing my phone. The worn leather of the chair gave a final, mournful groan. Chad looked up at me, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. He thought this was it. He thought the pain was over. "Get your team," I said. He blinked. My team?" "The hotshots. The ones who know so much about digital-first paradigms. Tell them to meet us at the service elevator at the end of the hall. No laptops. No tablets. Just bring gloves and notepads. Pen and paper." Confusion warred with fear on his face. "Gloves? Frank, where are we going?" "To work," I said, turning and walking out of the office. I didn't wait for him. I led the way down the corridor, my footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. The IT pit, once a hive of cocky energy, was now a funeral parlor. The young tech geniuses, the ones who used to roll their eyes when I talked about physical media, were now scrambling to their feet as Chad barked my orders at them. They looked at me with a new kind of expression, a terrifying cocktail of awe and dread. We met at the service elevator, a grime-streaked metal box I hadn't used in years. Chad and his three prodigies stood there, looking profoundly uncomfortable, their expensive shoes out of place on the scuffed linoleum. One of them, a kid named Leo, who had once told me my cable management was a fire hazard waiting to happen, was holding a pair of leather work gloves like they were venomous snakes. I pressed the call button. The elevator arrived with a shudder and a groan. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hydraulic fluid and dust. I hit the button for the sub-basement, a level they probably didn't even know existed. The doors slid shut, plunging us into the dim, flickering light of a single emergency bulb. The descent was a journey to another world. The smooth, quiet ride of the main elevators was replaced by a rattling, noisy plunge. When the doors opened, it wasn't to a world of marble and glass, but one of exposed pipes, humming transformers, and bare concrete. The air was cold and damp. "This way," I said, leading them down a long, poorly lit corridor. Our footsteps echoed off the walls. This was my domain, the foundation of the entire tower. I knew every pipe, every junction box, every stain on the floor. This was the physical reality that supported their digital fantasy world. We turned a corner and stopped. Before us was a massive, gray steel door, the kind you'd see on a bank vault. Next to it was a keypad, dark and inactive, and below that, a heavy-duty key lock. It was the entrance to the outer vestibule of the vault complex, the first gate. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, heavy, old-fashioned brass key. It felt solid and real in my hand. I watched their eyes fixate on it. This small piece of metal was now more valuable than all the encryption software they had ever bought. Chad swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "What's the code, Frank?" I ignored him, inserting the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying deep thunk. A heavy bolt retracted inside the door. Then, and only then, did I turn my attention to the keypad. My fingers hovered over the numbers. This wasn't the password to the data. This was just the key to the front door, a simple one. I looked directly at Chad. His face was a mask of desperation. "The first lesson," I said, my voice echoing in the concrete tomb. "Access is a privilege, not a right. And you no longer have any." I turned back to the door, my body blocking their view of the keypad. They wouldn't even be granted the knowledge of how to open the first door. They would only be allowed to follow. I punched in the 7-digit code. It was the date of my honorable discharge from the Army. The keypad beeped its confirmation, and deep within the steel door, massive tumblers shifted with a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. The door swung inward with a low groan, revealing a small, brightly lit, sterile white room, an antechamber. The air inside was different, scrubbed clean, cold, and utterly still. Before us stood the true entrance to Vault 1. It was a circular door of polished steel, a foot thick, looking like something torn from a submarine. There was no keypad, just 2 keyholes, set a yard apart, and a single, heavy, steel wheel in the center. I turned to Chad and his team of wide-eyed prodigies. They stood huddled at the threshold, afraid to cross into my world. "This," I said, my voice unnaturally loud in the silent room, "is an airlock. The interior vault maintains positive pressure to keep dust out. Nobody enters the vault but me." From another pocket, I produced a second brass key, identical to the first. I handed it to Chad. His hand was clammy. "You will stand here," I instructed, pointing to the second keyhole. "Your associate, Leo, will stand at the first. When I give the command, you will both insert and turn your keys simultaneously. Any deviation, and the lock seizes for 24 hours. Understand?" They nodded dumbly, moving into position like automatons. Leo's hands trembled as he held the key. I stood back, watching. "Now." They turned the keys. A soft click echoed in the room. I stepped forward, gripped the cold steel wheel, and began to turn. It was heavy, a real physical effort. With each turn, I could feel the locking bars retracting. This wasn't about speed. It was about deliberate, mechanical security. The very thing they had mocked. With a final, deep hiss of equalizing pressure, the circular door swung open. Inside, it was near freezing. Racks upon racks of black LTO tape cartridges stood in perfect, gleaming rows under harsh LED lighting. Each tape was labeled with a precise, printed code. This was the firm's lifeblood, its history, its entire value, stored on magnetic tape in a concrete box deep beneath the earth. I walked inside, the heavy door swinging shut behind me, leaving them in the antechamber. Through the thick porthole window, I could see their pale, anxious faces watching me. I moved with purpose, consulting a sequence I knew by heart. I selected a case of 12 tapes from a specific rack, the master database backups from the previous evening. I carried the heavy plastic case back to the door, which I opened just enough to step through. I set the case on a small steel table in the antechamber. Then I turned to Chad and placed the thick, leather-bound ledger I'd brought from my office in front of him. "Open it," I commanded. He did. The page was blank except for the heading I'd written. System Restoration. Vault 1. I opened the tape case. "Your team will log the serial number from every one of these cartridges. By hand. In this ledger, you will write the number, and the person next to you will verify it aloud. Then you will initial it. There will be no mistakes." Leo scoffed, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "We could just scan the barcodes with a, 'You will do it by hand.'" I cut him off, my voice like ice. "You will do it because the process matters. You will do it because you need to physically feel the weight of the data you were so willing to risk." They fell silent. Humiliation radiated from them in waves. Chad, the high-flying VP, picked up the fountain pen. He uncapped it, his movements stiff and clumsy. He pulled out the first tape, read the long alphanumeric serial number, and began to write. While they toiled over their humiliatingly simple task, I opened a locked cabinet on the wall and removed a portable, ruggedized LTO-8 tape drive. I connected it to a firewalled restoration terminal in the corner of the room, a standalone machine that had never once touched the company's main network. I slid the first tape into the drive. The terminal screen flickered to life, displaying a single, stark prompt, enter passphrase. Chad finished logging the last serial number, his hand cramping. He looked up at me, his face a ruin of exhaustion and despair. "Frank? The password?" I stared at the blinking cursor on the screen. I didn't look at him. "When my daughter was born, she had a hole in her heart. They kept her in the neonatal intensive care unit. For 17 days, we didn't know if she'd make it." I paused, the memory still sharp, still painful. Her room number was A713. It was the longest 17 days of my life. I typed it in. A7131, 7 days. Backquote. The drive word. On the screen, the prompt was replaced by a stream of text. Backquote, passphrase accepted. Initializing restoration. Backquote. I turned. The whir of the drive was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my vindication. Data began streaming to the isolated terminal, clean and uncorrupted. Through the porthole, I saw Chad's shoulders slump in a wave of relief so profound it was almost pathetic. He thought the worst was over. He was wrong. The worst for him was just beginning. For the next 8 hours, that sterile antechamber became my classroom and their purgatory. One by one, I had them ferry the tapes from the vault to the restoration drive. They handled the cartridges like holy relics, their movements clumsy and uncertain. Leo, the cable management expert, fumbled a case. The plastic clattered on the concrete floor, a sound that made every one of them jump. I just stared at him until beads of sweat formed on his brow. He didn't make that mistake again. I made them read the serial numbers aloud, enunciating each character, while another logged it. They were a Greek chorus of failure, their voices monotone and defeated. Chad Williams, the vice president of Sterling Financial, spent his afternoon on his knees, labeling restored drives with a Sharpie marker. On each label, under the drive designation, I made him write my name, Kowalski, as a mark of ownership. Sometime around hour 5, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus, the security guard. "God damn, Frank, just saw the memo. They're calling you a legend up here." A slow, cold satisfaction settled deep in my bones. It was better than the 5 million. It was validation. Another text came in, from a project manager I'd respected. "The old man's Folly just saved our asses. Drinks are on me for life." Quote. As the final tape finished its transfer, Chad looked up, his face hollowed out, his expensive suit stained with dust. Is that it? Are we done?" I powered down the terminal and packed the drive into its case. I looked at the ledger, filled with their frantic, clumsy handwriting. Then I looked at him. "We're not done, Chad," I said, my voice quiet. "This was just the first vault. There are 2 more, and the price for the next password just went up." I tapped the ledger. "Tomorrow you're going to learn how to do this right. The lesson continues until I'm satisfied you understand the difference between cost and value." He didn't argue. He just nodded, a broken man in a concrete tomb of his own making. "So if you were in my shoes, holding the one thing that could save the company that just fired you, what would you do? Would you help them? And if so, what would be your price?"